Hello, hi, what's up everyone? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and today, on January 8th, I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of December. I read 17 books. I backloaded a lot of reading, I guess you could say, because that's the most amount of books that I read in the whole entire year. And I really want to film my wrap up, let you guys know what I was reading. I don't necessarily have a lot of time today, so I might buzz through it, try to go as fast as I can, while still doing a good job, of course. And what did I want to say? Oh yeah, my other 2024 related videos, I want to do a 2024 reading resolutions plan, what's happening with that. I don't think I'll have time to film that today, so just stay tuned. That might come later in the year. Sorry, later in the month. But yeah, without further ado, let's just dive right into it. One of the first books that I read, I started the month off with a dud. I really just did not like this book. This is better than before, what I learned about making and breaking habits to sleep more, quit sugar, procrastinate less, and generally build a better life, I think the name of the book is. This is by Gretchen Rubin. So a few years ago, a long time ago, I'd read one of her first initial books, which is about happiness and habits, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I thought that this would be a good segue, especially considering in November, I read that other book about habits, which I was a little iffy about, but I do think in comparison, that was a lot more helpful. I think Gretchen Rubin is one of those people who wrote a compelling book and since then has really built a career out of it and a lifestyle and a brand, and she's got a lot going for her. She has her happiness project and all that stuff. This book did not have a lot of helpful tips. In many regards, I've forgotten a lot of it. I do think it's kind of mean of me, but it felt a little bit like a vanity project at certain times. I learned a lot more about her personal life and her parenting style and things like that I don't really think I needed to know. So this wasn't for me. But after that, we moved on to another nonfiction read, which was brilliant, incredible, Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. David Grann. So this, as you know, has been made into the movie. I wanted to read it before the movie came out or before I watched the movie. I didn't get around to it, but I would have to say, maybe I can still find a viewing and make it out to the cinemas, but I did really enjoy this book. This is really great nonfiction narrative, very compulsive, easy to follow along, filled with so much detail, and it is very upsetting because what happened to this tribe is horrible. And it's a very harrowing read in that regards, but the author did a great job at relaying the facts, the people, getting into the nitty-gritty, solving the situation. And then at the end, we kind of get a bit of an acknowledgement sort of epilogue situation where he's like, what we think as these murders, what we consider the years, let's say it was maybe 3 years, he goes, it was more than that. It was way more than that. It started earlier and it ended later, but because of just the lack of care and maybe resources, we will never know the answers to some of these things. It was really messed up what ended up happening, and I think the after effects of this are still felt in Oklahoma. And then the other second part about this book is also talking a lot about how the FBI is grown and built, and that's also very interesting. After that, I finished another nonfiction book, which I'm sorry, I put all these notes for myself about things that I thought were interesting. So this book is called Wifedom by Anna Funder, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. It's a really big book, but decent amount of space. You can manage it. It just took me a little bit longer than I expected. So though this is nonfiction, it is not strictly nonfiction. Anna Funder is an author, I think she's Australian, who really liked George Orwell and then for some reason kind of falls into this path of wanting to learn more about Eileen. Eileen was George Orwell's first wife and the one whose influence on George Orwell's life really shaped and affected his literary output and his style. So, however, keeping that in mind, a lot of what we know about Eileen has been shrouded in mystery, and the biographers don't really give her a lot of attention because Orwell didn't really mention her a lot in his notebooks and journals. So Eileen is going back in time, really relaying the picture of who Eileen was. But she's also not just leaving us with the facts, she's delving into creative writing, and she will imagine what Eileen's inner world was like when she was writing things and what she must have been feeling, and she does that. So you have the nonfiction of the actual facts, and you have her creative writing about what she thinks Eileen must have been feeling at certain points when she was writing a letter to her bestie. And then you have Anna Funder talking about her personal life, projecting the text with details from her life. For example, at one point they had a depressed French exchange student hanging around. She talks about the supposed witty remarks her kids make, which weren't that witty. Her experience one time when she was in like early adulthood, when her best friend, one of her close friends, was dating a rock star, famous musician, and he made a move on Anna Funder, and then Anna Funder decided to tell her bestie, and somehow this connects to Eileen. It is just things like that feel a bit tenuous. It wasn't working for me. The facts, however, when Anna Funder does give us the facts, when she does turn to the women around Eileen and George Orwell and gives us the exact quotes of what these ladies were saying, what they really thought about George, what they thought about Eileen, fascinating. And why that is because a lot of the biographers don't really give these women credence. So at one point, I think someone says something like, there was something about George, he was kind of stupid. And the biographers don't like that, right? Because the biographers are primarily male. So they like altered her text a little bit. And I just think really getting into those details and giving the women around George and Eileen the credence and the space to air their thoughts gives us like an added nuance and layer that's really interesting. Then I read, sorry, I have to like, it's a long title. New Kings of the World, Dispatches from Bollywood, Dizi, and K-pop. This is about 4 hours maybe on audio. That's how I consumed it. That's how I listened to it. This is a rather short book that's looking at our current pop culture landscape and talking about the influence of America in the world, but also how America as, you know, an imperialistic cultural empire does not hold sway with the rest of the world anymore. It may have in the past, but now it doesn't, as the American media landscape is really focused on stories of success, individuals who are really hell-bent on getting whatever it is that they want, and there's a lot of sex and just whatever, and that's not necessarily as connected with the rest of the world, who is more so focused on like family values or just family, community. Those kind of ideas aren't as prevalent in our American media. So the author's looking at the different ways American media has affected these three things and resulted in their rise and growth, and really like diving deep into them. So she talks about Bollywood, how Bollywood is, I mean, I think, I don't watch a lot of Bollywood, but like I respect my people's entertainment, because Bollywood, those guys, they've been in the game. They've been doing it before the States, and the amount of money that this industry really can make it's crazy. So anyways, she's talking about that. She's talking about Shah Rukh Khan and how his stories appeal throughout the world. She looks at a few countries in South America and communities where these individuals, they love Bollywood so much that they're speaking Hindi, they're learning the dances, they're having cultural events, and it's really quite interesting. And then she has a chapter where she's spending time with Shah Rukh Khan, and he seems really thoughtful, and it was very interesting. And he drinks a lot of coffee. That's those takeaways from there. And then she's talking about Dizi. Dizi is they're not exactly soap operas, but they're kind of the closest thing that I can say for you to like understand. But these come from Turkey. And she's talking about these soap operas, which are they're very different from South Asian soap operas. South Asian soap operas are really bad. They're very dramatic and focused on the same things happening, and they get really convoluted and crazy and wild. But I guess that's not the case with the Turkish ones. The Turkish ones really focus on the everyday man and woman and their personal triumphs against adversity, which appeal to a lot of people, not just in Turkey, but the Arab world as well as South Asia. And she's looking at how there's this really interesting section where she goes to speak with Syrian refugees who actually have a really strong attachment to these Dizi soap operas, because they're like, oh, that is what Syria is like. But some of the older people in their community are like, no, like it's just been dubbed so that it works for us, but that's not really what Syria is. There's like a lot of layered, a lot of nuance, very interesting. Check it out. And then finally she goes on to K-pop, which I'm not someone who knows a lot about K-pop. I don't listen to K-pop music, but respect the hustle. Those guys are really going for it. And she's talking about how K-pop is really interesting because it plays off of American pop, and in a way that, like, intuitively when you listen to it, you do pick up on that. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been a little bit hard for me to get into it, because sometimes I hear songs and I'm like, oh, that kind of reminds me of like this from the 90s or whatever. So she talks about that, she explains that, and then she talks about how they're circumventing it and making it their own, but it does connect very much so to American imperialism, which is really interesting. So I say check that out. I do think that maybe we could have gotten a little bit more in the text to really talk about current things, but I think this book came out like 3-4 years ago. Okay, then after that, I read Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and I read this once. I was so taken away, so taken aback by it, loved it so much. I listened to it again, like actually sat down, listened to it, and was taking notes by hand. So Cal Newport is also kind of a Gretchen Rubin-esque character in the sense that he's got a podcast, he's got a website, he's really built himself as a person who gives interesting and sage advice, I guess you could say, on productivity and those kinds of things. But this was my first entry point into his work, and I do think that the book was solid, very helpful. But let me give you a bit more information about what he's talking about. So the book's main argument is that individuals need to have a philosophy of technological use that is rooted in their values and therefore governs their social media tech usage. So what does that mean? That means, let's say one of your values is community. So you could be like, Facebook, Meta, those baloney people, they say that their app and technologies and platforms are really great for fostering community. But is it? Is it actually? When you're actually engaging with Instagram, are you building and fostering community? And that's kind of the premise. But taking a step back, so he's talking about how most people, tech is kind of takes over their life, and just the nature of social, that's how it is, that's what happens. You get sucked in without really realizing it, and you kind of lose autonomy as you end up frittering away the time. And he suggests that you should use tech. He's not saying you should absolutely drop it, but you should use it in a way that is optimized for your life and to make sure that you're really getting the most amount of value out of the tech that you are using. He guides the reader through his findings on how they are examples of behavioral addiction, how tech companies give you vague descriptions that kind of cover up their nefarious ways, which is mostly to take up your time and attention, to sell you things, etc. Then he's talking about different communities like the Amish and the Mennonites and how they will play with tech to decide whether or not they want to integrate it into their own life. And he also makes the case for greater solitude, walking, and leisure. But before he even gets there, he recommends that individuals take a digital detox to really look at the ways in which they're utilizing social, digital, tech, whatever. And I was really intrigued by his conversations around solitude, walking, and high quality leisure. So one of the things that he says is that solitude, the definition that he uses, it's a subjective state of mind where your mind is not being affected by anyone else's. So even if you're listening to music, that's not solitude. Like, wild, right? So it's actually being disconnected, not being on your phone, not listening into someone's conversation at a coffee shop. It's actually silence. And it's through those opportunities that you're then able to really reflect upon your own life and make decisions, make moves. But when you're using social media, you're spending less time alone with your thoughts because you're engaging with other people's thoughts, whether it's through a street interview, mini mics, sprinkle, you know what's out there. You know what's out there and what's eating away at your attention. And one of the ways that he then talks about ways that you can spend time away from your phone, shifts that you can make, how we should all be going out walking. Nietzsche apparently would go for walks like 8 hours a day in the mountains. Like, do I need to be doing that? Is that what we should all be doing, walking for 8 hours? And then he kind of adds that one of the problems that we have is that most people don't have experiences of high quality leisure. We look to social media as a leisure activity, but actually for most people it really drains them. And why is that? And then he makes this case, he uses some fancy word for it that I don't remember, that the more you put out into your leisure, if it drains, that the more energy you expend on your leisure, it actually will give you more energy, which is very counterintuitive from what we expect, because most people, you have a stressful job, whether you're Zoom call, email marketing situation, or actually physical labor, you're out there. When you come back home, the last thing you want to do is do something that is once again physically or mentally draining. You just want to disconnect. But he argues that if you actually do something that really uses your brain, you'll probably have more energy afterwards. Examples of high quality leisure that he gives are metalworking, which is not something I think most people will do, but even knitting, journaling, he talks chopping wood, really physical manual labor is one of those, but things where you are problem solving, using your hands, using your body, using your thoughts, those are examples of high quality leisure that will improve everyone's life. Because most of the time, most of you guys, as well, we don't have high quality leisure. Though I do think reading is high quality leisure, and I think he makes that case as well. But he says that most people end up turning to social and tech because they don't have enough high quality leisure to make them actually want to not be on their phones. And because we don't have leisure that is engaging and interesting, we are spending more and more time on our phone. That was a really long discussion on that book. I did write about it in my newsletter because I was really intrigued by this book and was really dissatisfied with the social landscape and my usage, and I have built a couple of new rules into my life to mitigate those feelings of social ennui. Then I read Happy by Celina, Baljeet, Basra. This was an arc from Astro House. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So this is a really interesting book that is a postmodernist exploration of a Punjabi migrant worker who is incredibly just naive and has a good, pure soul that's just not meant for this world. And he is a little whimsical and head in the clouds for sure, finds himself in Italy, and things do not go as he expected. And you're just following along on his journey. This is a story that is told through, I guess you could say fragments, like each section has a header, and then we have some poetry, we have some songs, we have lots of discussion around food, and there's like a CV at one point. It's very experimental, that's the word. It's very like experimental in its usage, and I think it's very interesting to show an issue that is so prevalent in this day and age, but it is not traditional narrative. So if you're expecting to really be in Happy's thoughts, to get a description of Punjab, Italy, it's not like that. Okay, then I did an audiobook on writing. I'm gonna come out and say something really wild. I have never read a Stephen King book before, and I know he's so prolific and I really should pick something up, but I somehow have not done so. But you know, cultural osmosis, you kind of do end up picking up a lot about him and his work. This book was really interesting. The first half is kind of focused on his upbringing, the touch points of craft in his life, how he found his way there, his college experience. I was a little bit surprised to find the tone to be like, it's a little crass at times. I wasn't expecting that. It's very interesting, but he's mostly, I guess you could say, from Maine. It has a very interesting point of view. And then the second half is him talking about craft, and it is a lot of what you would expect. And I think his advice is sound. Like, he knows what he's talking about. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about him or craft. Then after that, I did another audiobook. This is The Wife of Bath, a biography. And this is really interesting because The Wife of Bath, if you don't know, is a character from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And she's a badass, right? Like, she's incredible. And our author is building a biography for her, which is an interesting thing to do, right? Because she wasn't a real person. So how she does this is she's looking at women, medieval women at the time. And she reveals that what we expect of medieval women is like different than what it actually was. Like, these women did have a lot of agency. The laws were kind of in their favor to gain property, and women were working, women were marrying by their third or fourth marriage. Let's say they're 20 something and they have amassed a huge fortune and wealth. And so she's talking about that. Margaret Kemp comes up. I really loved the first half of this book, which was a real exploration of medieval women. And then the second half of the book is looking at how the idea of the wife of Bath has been utilized by literature and different creators and artists. I really liked the exploration of James Joyce's Ulysses. I didn't know that he was a big fan of Chaucer and the ways that he played with that. And then it goes deeper into the different ways of different communities and women who are claiming the voice of the wife of Bath and making it their own. And I lost the plot a little bit towards the end. was not as interested in that, but I do think it's a really great read if you like Chaucer. The Wife of Bath is of interest to you. I would have to say on the most part, I really liked it. Then I did another nonfiction. She's really having her nonfiction moment. Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency by Olivia Laing. These are a collection of essays. I think a lot of it is her published writing that's just been expanded and put into one book form. And Olivia Laing is a really thoughtful writer of the arts. She writes about it in a way that is incredibly compelling, incredibly beautiful. And you can tell that Olivia has devoted her life to the arts, and I think that's really commendable. The writing, especially the sections about specific artist, really spoke to me. I liked when we got this deeper look into Georgia O'Keeffe, Hilary Mantel. That was a really interesting chapter. The chapter on Agnes Martin was also quite interesting. But my complaint, if you will allow me to do that, I don't really think these essays actually spoke to Art in Emergency at all. Like, I don't even think that should have been the header. That was, it was very, that connection, that leap is really nebulous. Yeah, there were times where it was mentioned how, you know, authors and creators who were living through the AIDS epidemic, how they were navigating those times. There was occasional mentions of Trump, but for the most part, I don't really think we were actually looking at art in emergency. This was just a really contemplative, meditative look at art in different people's lives and different creators' lives, and she just writes really well, so this was definitely enjoyable. Then, in anticipation of Crescent City #3, Sarah J. Maas coming through with a new book, I decided to reread Crescent City 1 and Crescent City 2. Their actual names are like House of Fire and whatever. I can't keep track of everything, all those names. It's just too much for me. So I read the first one, I read the second one. This was a reread and it was really well worth it. I think maybe next year, December, from December 25th to 31st, I will only be reading fantasy rereads. That's the move, most likely. Who knows? Probably not. I'll probably change my mind. But anyways, Sarah J. Maas, also prolific, really doing well, pushing the romantic fantasy, whatever category. She writes really compelling plots that move you along. Her writing is not the strongest. I wish she used less cliches. I wish she was less hyperbolic. I wish she would stop using the word mate every like 2 pages and things like a feral smile or a purely male smile. We don't need that. But I did enjoy rereading these because I'd forgotten a lot of the details. Crescent City is, I think it is an allegory of our current day times where she is looking a lot at social stratification, people being objectified, and the powers that be keeping secrets from us. Like, really interesting if you view it through that lens, but even if you don't, it's a good time. I'd have to say that the first book, definitely, I felt the same way on a reread. It takes 100 pages before you get into it because the world building is just very complex or like not very seamless. It's just hard to get into, but then once you're there, you're in it. And I enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to the third one, which comes out I think on January 31st. I'm like, I already know what I'm doing that day. I'm buying the book, I'm going home, and I'm reading it. I'm booked and busy. Okay, then I read a biography. This is about Doris Duke. So the title of the book is The Silver Swan in Search of Doris Duke. I did not like this book. I'm so sorry. I didn't like how this book was organized and structured. If you don't know, Doris Duke was considered or labeled as one of the richest girls in the world, the richest woman in the world. Her father died when she was about 12 or 13, and he gave her a huge fortune and gave it in such a way that she would get segments of it at different points in her life. I think it was like 21, 25, 30, something like that. And she led a very interesting life, and because of the access that she had to wealth, she traveled a lot, she collected a lot of art, she did a lot for charities, she donated a lot of money. And my struggle with this book was that it was not told in a linear fashion. So maybe if you already knew a lot about Doris Duke, you could turn to this book. But I, someone who did not know anything about her, found it to be really hard because when we start, Doris is like 25, she's already been through her first divorce, she's just about to get married to the second guy, she's running around in Italy trying to have a job and like doing things, and might have been a CIA operative, like I don't know. There was a lot happening and I was like, who the fuck is this girl? And then we like move along through different parts of her life, and it was just really hard for me to like track this linearly because I didn't know anything about her, but somehow you like dive right into it. And at times I was like, is this book looking at Doris Duke, or is it looking at how rich people can donate money in the different ways that they can build a legacy through that? I was just having a really hard time with it, though there were some really interesting details, and I probably will check out another biography about her because she led a really interesting life. It's interesting to read something like this to see how wealth can really affect and impact someone's life, and how they cannot trust a lot of people as a result of that, how they think everyone's kind of out for their money, how they can sometimes get into relationships hot and heavy. It was just interesting, but I didn't like the structure, so I probably wouldn't recommend it. Then after that, I read Margaret Kemp by Robert Gluck. This is fiction. So if you don't know, Margaret Kemp was a medieval woman who kind of wrote the first autobiography. She wrote the first autobiography. And she was a woman who was really devout, who had a relationship with Jesus, and what Robert Gluck is doing is he's expanding on that. He's talking about Margaret having a sexual relationship with Jesus. That's one side of the story. The second side of the story kind of mirrors that, and it's a story of the writer of the text who is in love with Elle. Elle, just as Jesus is unattainable for Margaret, Elle is also likewise unattainable. He is too rich. The chasm between them is too big. They can never fully reach their love. And this book is thematically exploring love, desire, death, the body. The body comes up a lot here. It's very abject. It is very intense descriptions almost. It's very unusual. I would say this is very subversive. It is very interesting. I liked this a lot. I thought it was really cool, but I don't think it's for everyone. Then after that, I read Kappa. Now this is a short little allegory fable about a man who falls down a hole in Japan and comes across a community of kappas. Kappas are these kind of frog-like entities that are come from Japanese folklore, and our narrator is encountering this community, and he's like, you guys are kind of weird. And they're like, we're not weird. You Japanese people are weird because we do this while you guys do that. So though this is more focused on Japan and talking about that, I do think for modern readers, you can see a lot of similarities about the differences that modernity has made us act weird, I guess you could say. I liked this. I thought it's a really quick read. You can get it done in an hour. Very interesting. Gives you a lot of thoughts to think about on what does it mean to be human? How do we organize society? Are the moves we're making right and sound? Are there different ways to be doing things? Oh, okay, my God. Oh, goodness. Then the second to last book that I read was Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. Now this, I also did an audio while I was doing my puzzle, and it was a really good thing to listen to while I was doing my puzzle. This book is really nuanced. There's a lot she has packed into this. Now, if you don't know, Naomi Klein is the author of No Logo, which was big in the 90s. I think that's when it came out. I don't know. I had to read it in high school, but I don't really remember a lot of it. So maybe I should reread it. But she's had a career. She wrote that book, No Logo, about logos, marketing, whatever, and she talks about how when she published the book, she didn't really want to brand herself. That was very naive of her, but she has become a brand, blah, blah, blah. She's been going about doing her career. She has an interest in global warming and brands and whatever, and she's talking about most specifically looking at the COVID time, because that is when she fell down a deep rabbit hole, because there's this other woman called Naomi Wolf, who the two often get mixed up for. Even though they don't really look alike, they are 10 years apart, whatever it may be. Now, Naomi Wolf was a woman who wrote some book in the 80s about feminism and whatever, and so she built a career like that, and then the career fell off, and now she's big into the conspiracies and Tucker Carlson and that other guy. There's a lot happening, okay? And so she's talking about why Naomi would have gone down that path, but it's not just about Naomi and her and their relationship. She's looking at how different communities, so moms of American mothers, can fall down the rabbit hole of being anti-vax. She's looking at how fitness people also fall prey to this. There's so much happening in this book. I would definitely recommend it. It was just so nuanced and just rich with detail that I am not doing it justice, and I don't even think I'm going to go on a bit more about it because there's so much to unpack with this book. I will end with I thought this is the most wild thing about the book. She goes through most of this book and then she kind of ends it. The ending is a little too like, we can do it by working together, you know, but whatever, what can you do? How can authors really solve the problems of our day and times? There's a lot of pressure. But what she does reveal is that though she had reached out to Naomi Wolf to interview her for the book, her people never responded to her. And she was like, I wonder if Naomi Wolf remembers me. We had met in college when I was asked to interview her. And when I went to interview her, I was like, oh, by the way, like, I'm the woman who's interviewing you for the paper. And Naomi Wolf says to her, I know, I recognized you because you look like you've been raped. Wow, what a wild thing to say to someone. And I was just shocked by that. And so I guess like then Naomi Wolf, the author of the book, Naomi Klein, talks about how she's like, I wonder how often like she's used this line on women and like forged a relationship with them by just being very intense and just very interesting. I definitely think you should give this a read. It explains some stuff, some moves about how things are happening in this country, but also it looks at Canada, which I think I really appreciated. And she also mentions, because she's Canadian, I had no idea, she mentions how like us Canadians, we feel very smug about our country and the way we move and operate. And she's like, we really shouldn't, because we got XYZ also happening in similar ways as they are in America, but just slightly different. So I did appreciate that. And then towards the end, she's also looking at Israel, Palestine. It's applicable to what's happening currently. So give that a go. Then the last book that I read was a McNally's edition, which I did not bring with me. It's upstairs in my room. I'm so sorry that I will have to add the image here. This is called Lord Jim at Home by Dina Brooke. Dina Brooke, really interesting lady. She wrote about like 3 or 4 novels. She's still kicking. She's in London. And she wrote about 3 or 4 novels, and then she decided to follow Osho, and she went to India. She lived in his ashram, and she was like, it's because of you I've stopped writing and whatever. Lots of fun, very interesting woman. But Lord Jim was a book that she wrote to look at upper middle class British people and to show them how someone in their community could do something so wild, so shocking, so galvanizing. And the book is interesting. It's really long for what it is, I think, but I did enjoy it. Okay, let's get into it. So basically, she takes this one character, his name is Giles, and she takes him from birth to what ends up happening, what he does. And she starts with him as a baby, and at this point things are like told in a sort of allegorical way. The baby Giles is called the prince, you have the mother the queen, you have the king, you have their grandfather who's called the judge. So everyone has those titles, and she's kind of talking about how the child is being raised and how he was taken from his mother, given to a nanny. The first nanny was horrible. She was literally like child abusing this kid. He suffered a lot from neglect, and the mother is a weak character, so she's not able to step in and like protect him or spend more time with him. And the judge and the nurse, the judge's nurse, are having this very like powerful sexual dynamic relationship going on that honestly I loved that. I thought that was so good. Would have loved if that was expanded and that was the whole book. Like that was some really phenomenal fun writing. So you see the child grow, then you see a second nanny, then you see him going to school, and he's just stunted. Like, though everyone recognizes that he's not dumb, he's just not like with it. He's just doesn't fit into the conventions of the time, and he just doesn't necessarily have like the best skills. He's just very like goes about his life, and he always looks a little bit like dirty and unpolished in comparison to everyone else. He has a younger brother, and the younger brother is so much better at life and just living within their world. Then he goes into the Navy and definitely experiences some PTSD, and though he likes the structure of the Navy, you can tell that, and that takes up a lot of the novel. And then you have him back in London, and he's really struggling to hold down a job, and he's just not acclimating to life very well. And then he falls in love with a lady, and then things are moving and happening, and then the act happens. Otessa Mashag loves this book, and I think that gives you like a lot of context and helps you understand the book a bit more. But it's very interesting the ways she was moving through the text. I think midway through, once he goes to boarding school, she stops referring to him as the prince, and I just like I think that was a very interesting decision, or just I don't know if we needed that. Like at times I struggled with it a little bit, but I do think it's just an interesting look at storytelling. And I think that is what the McNally's editions really excel at, as they give you different modes of storytelling, which are not what we expect in this current contemporary lit fit market. So if that's of interest to you, check it out. Once again, it's another one of those McNally's books about rich British people, but it was kind of fun. Okay, with that, at almost 40 minutes, we are calling it a wrap. That was my December reading the final. Actually, I might do one more video about 2023 related content, but more movie focused. I don't know. Let me know if you're interested in that, if you made it to the end of this video. But with that, I hope your January is going well. I hope you're having a phenomenal start to the reading year, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.